Hi, this is Yavish. A few weeks ago on this channel, Matt talked about the oldest Bible manuscripts that have ever been found. So naturally, this week we're going to talk about the oldest Quran manuscripts that we have available to us. The story of the Quran is quite different than that of the Bible. Muslims believe that the words of the Quran were dictated to the Prophet by the angel Gabriel, known as Jibril in Arabic. Then the Prophet passed these words on to his companions, who wrote it down in parts on leaves, rocks, parchment, etc. Though this book was meant primarily to be memorized and recited orally. The Prophet passed away in 632 CE when many of his senior companions were quite old themselves. So Muhammad's successors, the caliphs, started the project of turning the Quran from a loose collection of written and oral sources into a compiled book form. This project was finished in the reign of the third caliph, Utsman, somewhere around 650. So let's get to the oldest Quran manuscripts now. At number 8, we have the famous Blue Quran. It is a nearly complete copy of the Quran in Kufic script with over 600 parchment folios. Its defining characteristic is the blue color of the parchment and the golden writing. It was likely produced in the late 9th or early 10th century. However, we're not quite sure of where it was produced. Before the modern era, we know that it was in Kairouan in Tunisia around 1300 CE. Some scholars say that it was produced in the Abbasid Caliphate to be placed at Harun al-Rashid's tomb in Mashhad in Iran. Other scholars believe that it was produced in Tunisia. Its appearance is quite similar in some parts to the Bible of Kaaba, which was produced in Spain. This gives the idea that maybe the Blue Quran was also produced in Spain. Certainly, it's easier for a Spanish Quran to end up in Tunisia than it is for an Abbasid one. Most of it is now stored in Tunisia, with some folios here and there, including private collections and even the Metropolitan Museum in New York. At number 7, we have the Samarkand Quran. This one was originally attributed to Caliph Uthman and is even said to be stained with Uthman's blood when he was assassinated while reading the Quran in his home. However, that's not true, and it was produced more than a century after Uthman's death. It has been dated to around 775 CE to 995 CE. Its Kufic writing style indicates that it was produced during the Abbasid era, so more likely it was produced around the turn of the 9th century. Unfortunately, the Quran is not complete and only consists of chapter 2, verse 7 to chapter 43, verse 10. It stayed in Khwaja Ahrar Mosque in Samarkand for 4 centuries before the Russians bought it in 1869. It was then moved to the Imperial Library at St. Petersburg, where it was studied by Orientalists. It was returned to Samarkand by Lenin as a gesture of goodwill to the Muslims of the Soviet Union. At number 6, we have the oldest nearly complete Quran in existence. It is known as the Topkapi Quran. Like the name suggests, it is housed at the Topkapi Museum in Istanbul. Some pages are also in Medina in Saudi Arabia. In fact, that's where the Quran was before World War I. During the Arab revolts, the Quran was moved to Istanbul because of an impending battle in Medina. This Quran, like the Samarkand Quran, was attributed to Uthman, but it is also not Uthman's Quran. It was probably written around the mid-8th century. There seem to have been as many as 6 scribes of this Quran, so it seems to indicate that it was part of a large mass production campaign. In fact, some scholars believe that it and the Samarkand Quran came from the same source. They were probably produced around the same time in the same circumstances. I personally think that they were both produced in early Abbasid era, probably between Al-Mansur's coronation in 754 and Al-Ma'mun's death in 833. Though its writing is quite close in style with some Umayyad monuments like the Dome of the Rock and the Umayyad Mosque at Damascus, so that is also a possibility. Speaking of the Umayyads, at number 5 we have BLOR 2165. This manuscript was likely produced during the reign of the third Umayyad Caliph of the Marwanid branch, named Al-Walid, likely around 710 CE or slightly before that. It contains around 57% of the Quran written in the Hijazi Ma'il script. It has around 128 folios. It's stored in the British Library and is actually available to see online. Toward the end of the manuscript, a note reads the name of Reverend Gravel J. Chester and is dated to April the 29th, 1879. Reverend Chester helped the British Museum and several other institutions acquire a number of valuable historical artifacts. It's likely that he got this manuscript in Egypt, which is why it shares a history with the next manuscript on this list. At number 4, we have the Codex Parisino-Petropolitanus. It is quite similar to Codex BLOR 2165. It was found during the Napoleonic expedition in the mosque of Amr ibn al-As in Fustat, Egypt. BLOR 2165 was likely also found there, but it was acquired by the British, whereas Codex Parisino-Petropolitanus was acquired by the French. It has 118 folios that contain almost half of the Quran. It uses a Hijazi script and was probably written by up to 5 scribes, which again indicates that it was part of a mass production campaign. It has been dated to the second half of the 7th century. Most of it is stored in Paris's Bibliothèque Nationale de France. I didn't take French in school, so forgive my pronunciation. Although some pages of the document are found in the National Library of Russia, the Vatican Library, and the Khalili collection. At number 3, we have the Tübingen fragments. They've been carbon dated to 649 CE to 675 CE with 95% probability. There are 77 folios in this collection which contain a continuous portion of the Quran from chapter 17 verse 35 to chapter 36 verse 57. That's roughly a quarter of the Quran. The script is Hijazi, but interestingly, originally it was mistaken for Kufic. It was bought by a Prussian consul in the 19th century in Damascus. It's currently housed at the University of Tübingen in Germany. At number 2, we have the most interesting manuscript of the Quran ever found, the Sana'a manuscripts. They were found during renovations at the Great Mosque of Sana'a in 1972 among some 12,000 documents. Among these thousands of documents, there were various collections of the Quran, but it's tough to estimate which ones go together. Though this particular collection, known as the Sana'a manuscripts, is around 82 pages. On first glance, it's a normal standard Quran containing roughly half of the text. It was produced most likely around 670 CE or so, though carbon dating the parchment revealed that the parchment was produced around 617 CE to 647 CE. Scans revealed that the documents are a palimpsest, meaning the text we see on the surface was written after removing an older text. This means that the document has 2 layers of text, the newer upper layer and the older lower layer. While the upper layer is the standard text of the Quran, also known as the Uthmanic Quran, the lower layer is not standard. It is an alternate version of the Quran that has been named as the Companion One or C1 Codex. Tradition tells us that while Uthman standardized the Quran around 650 CE or so, it was a bit late. Other versions of the Quran were already floating around, with some being installed in mosques and some existing for private use. After Uthman standardized the Quran, he destroyed all alternate Qurans and sent his version to the major cities in the Caliphate. Now, these versions weren't like, for example, the Gospels or something. They were different from each other in ways that we would expect copies of the same document to be different. In other words, their differences are explained as errors made by scribes while copying from a master copy. The differences are very minor, with a word or two being different here and there, and spelling differences. I've talked more about this in my video on the Sana'a manuscripts over on Al-Muqaddimah, so you should check that out to learn more about it. Finally, at number 1, we have the oldest manuscripts from the Quran we have found to this date. The famous Birmingham manuscripts made the news when, in 2015, they were carbon dated by scholars to a time frame between 568 CE and 645 CE with 95% accuracy. For context, the Prophet was alive between 571 CE and 632 CE. Keep in mind that the parchment is dated to that period, not the text. What carbon dating actually tells us is that the animal from whom the parchment came was probably alive before or during the Prophet's lifetime. It's fair to assume that the parchment was prepared specifically for the purpose it was used for, since Western Arabia around the time didn't have a huge government or even a big writing culture. So parchment documents haven't been found in large numbers for anything but the Quran. So it's likely that the date of the parchment and the date of the text are quite close. For all the discussion surrounding it, the Birmingham manuscript is actually quite small. It is only 4 pages on 2 leaves of parchment and contains chapter 18 verses 17 to 31, chapter 19 verses 91 to 98, and chapter 20 verses 1 to 40. According to some scholars, it was probably written around 640 CE, though some scholars debate this. Also, the document is not a palimpsest. It has been scanned and no evidence has been found to indicate that the document was originally different. The text of the Birmingham manuscript matches too closely with the Uthmani Quran, so it's likely that it was produced after Uthman's standardization. If it was produced before him, we'd expect to see some differences, but we don't find them. But then again, this is a very small sample. It's written in the Hijazi script and matches the folios found at the Mosque of Amr ibn al-As in Fustat. The document is currently housed at the University of Birmingham as a part of the Mingana collection. This collection was compiled by Alphonse Mingana around 1920. He was funded by Edward Cadbury, the grandson of the chocolate company's founder. The manuscript is now there at the Cadbury Research Library. So these were the 8 oldest partial or complete manuscripts of the Quran we have available for study. Now, before I go, I'd like to add 2 more Quran manuscripts to this list because I found them very interesting. The first of these is the Timurid Aqyunlu Quran. In addition to being a copy of the holiest book of Islam, it is also a breathtaking work of art. It is written on dyed gold-flecked paper from Ming, China. There are 534 folios in this Quran, which is written in the relatively modern Naskh script. It was produced at the court of a Timurid prince in Central Asia or Afghanistan. In 2020, it made the news when it was sold by Christie's auction company for over £7 million, making it the most expensive copy of the Quran ever sold. Christie's only tells us its history as far as the 1980s, when, according to them, it was bought by the father of the man who sold it in 2020. Finally, we have the book known as Lex Muhammad, Pseudo-Prophet. I didn't take Latin in school either, so forgive my pronunciation. If you didn't take Latin, like me, then I'll tell you that the meaning of the name of the book is The Law of the False Prophet Muhammad. It was a Latin translation of the Quran by Robert of Ketton, an English priest, made on the request of Peter the Venerable in 1142, around 50 years after the First Crusade. It is the first translation of the Quran into a Western language. The purpose of the book was likely to try to bring some Muslims in Spain over to Christianity. Calling it a translation is really generous because it was a horrible translation. It was mostly just propaganda, but still it's quite interesting because the Quran at the time hadn't even been translated into all the languages of the Islamic world. Scholars believed that the Quran's Arabic was sacred and so it shouldn't be translated. So these were some of the oldest and most interesting manuscripts of the Quran. If you want to learn about the family tree of the prophets in the Quran, we have a video for that as well. Also, you can check out our video on the family tree of Prophet Muhammad and the early caliphs, which is narrated by yours truly. Thank you for watching.